Okay, I think we started.
Tea Earl Grey, hot.
Okay, welcome to the Picard maneuver.
Welcome.
I'm Tim,
I'm Joel,
and
and
this
this
is the
is
Picard maneuver.
yeah, and this is the Picard maneuver. And I've got
We
my
screwed
tea.
up. We used to be a lot better at the intros. Oh, so I was antiquing today. I got a new China tea cup.
What dynasty is it?
The fifth, the,
Nice.
eight, the 18th dynasty, the
By
19th
looking at it,
dynasty of Ramses II.
that's what I was gonna guess. Just like by seeing it, I wasn't 100% sure, but I was pretty sure. I'm really good at that. That's a skill I have.
Awesome. All right, so we are here doing our Just Watch review uh, discussion on the third episode of the third season of Picard, titled 17 Seconds and directed by Jonathan
Whew.
Frakes.
No way.
Directed and
Are you
starring
making that
Jonathan
up?
Frakes. I didn't make that up. That's the truth. He
Okay.
directed it. All right. So I
Just a
think,
heads up, I don't see the stream yet. I'm just letting you know.
okay, let me look at my refresh just to make sure it exists.
We like Star Trek. I like that that's our like heading.
Oh, I do see the stream.
Nice. Why don't I see it?
I can send you the link.
Yeah, do that. Do that. That's easier. And I do believe you, by the way. I don't
I
want
just
to.
clicked on it and I heard it say, you say, heads up, I don't see the stream yet.
The irony.
Yeah, I just sent you the link in our little ability to communicate.
I've been ironing. The irony
All
of
right.
irony. Oh, sorry. Yes.
So I found this episode, just a quick overall thoughts. There's a lot to talk
Yeah.
about. Some answers, some questions, some criticisms. I think fundamentally, the the writing of the episode, the arc of the episode, like the previous episode, had a straightforward conflict that had a good arc and a good sort of had a resolution we can talk about, but it actually worked as an episode. That's a
I would.
good thing.
I would. Yeah. Do you say that's a good thing?
Yeah.
It's a good thing. I would agree with that. I think we've got some of the elements that create what always made Star Trek great, which is we've got the conflict, we've got interpersonal conflict, we've got conflict with aliens, a ship, and I think that's in the first two seasons was just there's something about the location of and being on the ship and um, it becomes a character. Like the ships always have become characters in these shows. Whether it was DS9, it doesn't have to be a ship, but like one location that feels like this
Oh,
is where the crew
absolutely.
lives.
I think
And
a
yeah,
producer, I think Rick Berman always said that the ship was the actual star of the show.
yeah, and you hear that about a lot of whether it's sitcoms or films that the setting is really important to having the audience feel tonally connected and to feel like they're I don't know a part of something or so I think for Star Trek that's a key element and I think being feeling like you're on the ship, feeling you can hear the ship, you see like the crew, you start to get to know like I've already started to get to know a couple bridge members that are new characters. I don't necessarily know their name, but I'm starting to kind of like them on the bridge, like being like, "Oh, that's,
Hmm.
there's a Vulcan on the bridge. I forget the character's name, but like,
Yeah, I don't know
you
the
know,
name, but we got a sense of like the way they solve problems.
yeah.
You know?
Yeah, and so it's
Yeah.
already like this is what makes it there are other elements too, but yeah, this is one of the elements that I think makes it really work. So episode 3 follows is still kind of sticking with that, just like the first couple episodes, and I'm definitely happy with that. It
And I
took them
never
long enough to get there.
I never thought of this, but both this episode and then the previous episode, the A plot at least, are basically ship in a bottle episodes, where the
Mm,
entire thing happens on the ship, more or less, just on the couple ship sets that they have.
yeah, true, but I mean that always worked in the past, and
Yeah, I like it. Whereas I think in season two they were jumping around maybe a little too
Too
much.
much. Yeah, well, I think there was a little bit of I don't know, like the writers were maybe relying on that a little bit to try to create like interesting, like, okay, well, this setting will be cool and seeing the world more. And sometimes it is, and it's okay once in a while to do that, but it wasn't something that we need. Like Star Trek fans have never needed that. It's always been about the crew on the ship and their relationships and then the problems they solve or the things they
Hmm.
discover. I think that's what
And
people love.
they try to solve problems as characters in this episode for certain.
Yeah, yeah. So yeah, it felt good, and overall, I would give it a warp 8 out of 10.
Yeah.
What warp would you give it?
I don't know. I have some mixed feelings. There's some fundamental problems with this episode too, as far as answers to things, so sort of larger
Mm.
things. And I don't know if that derails the. I don't think that derails the entire episode, but I will have to talk about it.
All right, well, let's
So
start
let's.
talking about it. Let's go into some of the details.
Yeah. Oh, one thing that
Engage.
happens. Uh, engage at the very early in the episode is that we see a couple of the crew members blame Jack directly for the situation they're in. I think that's even in the first scene. At least that's the first note I have. They say this is your. It goes. He's sick and he's in med bay. He's been injured in the battle, and right away he's like, "This is your fault," blaming Jack,
Yeah.
which is something we don't see crew members do in
No.
other similar situations.
Right. Yeah, that was a bit unique, and odd because, like you said, crew like they're well trained. They're like professionals. It seems like generally like from the experience of seeing all these crews go through a lot of different things that often would be many different people's faults. Like if you were going to blame a person, there was always kind of somebody to blame, but that was never nobody had the need to blame anyone. It was like, okay, we're in this together. Let's figure out as a crew how we solve the problem. So, um, yeah, kind of a
Mm.
unique,
And there's
unique.
also a question of how that guy who was injured, presumably on some deck of the ship, even knew about Jack yet.
Hmm, that's true too.
But
Yeah.
but it's an important dynamic for Jack's character in the episode. So because he feels guilty, I think. And later on, he sort of has
Yeah,
to own it, right? Riker tells him to own it. So that's an
right.
important. It's an important
And
setup for what he's going through.
yeah, and even before he owns it, we can tell that he does feel guilty and feels bad about it. So like you can tell he's like because even when he tried, the last thing he tried to do before they ended up in this big chase is he tried to transport himself to Vatic to just give himself up because he didn't want to
Yeah,
get everyone else in a big dilemma.
yeah.
So correct.
Oh, there we have someone in chat. Matthew Cote said all of the characters in the new Star Treks whine more than I like.
Hmm.
Yeah, they definitely emote in a certain way that is
Well, and
generally
maybe
in the
that
new Trek.
I'm sure if
They
he's
have
watching, that would come back to our point of people complaining to Jack, saying like, "Hey, you got us into a problem," and you know. So I guess it is one of those things that didn't Star Trek crews in the past just they seemed like a well-oiled machine and not like and maybe that's individuals might complain in their own time, but I think professionally they wouldn't like walk through the halls of a ship being like, "Hey, man, you got us in a bad spot, man."
it's not very professional. There's overall a broader sign of the Federation or of Starfleet being less competent and less professional than they were in TNG. Anyway, hi Matt.
Hi, Matt. Yeah, no, you're right, and I think that's been a complaint of some people. But anyway,
Uh,
um, so they're
and
still in
very
this chase. Sorry.
yeah, they're still in the chase. Shaw wants to exit. Riker wants to go deeper in the nebula in the first scene,
Yeah.
and we quickly get a
Picard.
flashback. The episode right after sort of the setup episode and setting up of what's going on, we see a flashback of Riker and Picard. I think it's at Guinan's. It's at a bar. I think it's the same bar
It
that
was
we
like
had
the
they had a
Earth
scene
version of
in.
like 10, yeah, 10 forward, like on. It's supposed to be in like L.A. or something.
Yeah, Guinan's bar, and that's where they were in the first
Oh, right,
episode.
the one that it literally was on like 10 Forward Avenue or something. I can't remember,
Yeah,
but
that's what it
yeah.
was. 10 Forward Avenue. But they were aged down, so this would have been about 15 years ago when his son Thaddeus was born.
Yeah, so they're doing the whole like I don't think they don't literally smoke cigars, do they? But they're kind of doing the whole like congrats and
Yeah, I think they're drinking
um,
whiskey.
we have a photo of that, a still.
Oh, oh yeah,
There they are. You're like, oh
yeah,
yeah,
that's
okay.
definitely Guinans. And so this flashback in particular is Picard's memory, not Riker's. So if the way it cuts it, it shows Picard remembering this, and he's thinking about his own son, which doesn't track with maybe Picard's later in the episode. Seems to be motivated by thinking about his son potentially when we try to break down what he's thinking. But this
Yeah.
is a Picard flashback.
Now, just
Um,
quickly, do you want to talk at all about the scene? Any of the details? Because I thought it was funny
Go
when,
ahead.
well, Deanna calls in and
Oh yeah.
says that he like puked over the warp coil or something, or like near. And she's like, "You better get back here, Riker. You know your son's doing this." And he's like, "Oh." But I
There's
saw somebody else reviewing it was saying like the engineering, like to take your baby to engineering is probably like the least safe place on the starship to like have a baby. And like
Oh, well,
why?
I was going to say that's a pretty classic Easter egg. There's a sequence, it's a Deep Space Nine episode where Worf is trying to keep, is taking care of Kurayoshi, O'Brien and Keiko's son, who was just born, actually born through Kira. But anyway, there's an episode where he has to take care of the baby because everyone else is busy. And as I remember, Worf can't get him to fall asleep anywhere, and he's always crying, and Worf doesn't know what to do. And Worf finally figures out that the hum of the warp core on the Defiant is like the perfect thing to get the baby to go to sleep. So he finally, that's where he ends up leaving the baby is in engineering
So
next to the
I
warp
guess
core.
Deanna was doing the same thing. I guess.
Yeah, I think that was the that might have been an Easter egg in that respect.
All right, all right, all right. Fair enough. Anyway, I thought that was kind of funny because then he's like,
Hmm.
she's doing the whole like, you better get back here, like your son is blah blah blah, and then they kind of laugh about it, and it's a nice moment between Riker and Picard, and it's one of
A
those
nice
moments that
moment.
like, yeah. Did you? I feel like the way you said that you have there's something you take issue with,
Yeah, there's
or is it
one
just that
line
it's
in
Picard's
there
memory?
that Riker says that jumped right out at me. He says, in talking about being a new father, that you feel like you have
Oh right,
to take care of them at all costs, burn the world to save them, which
right.
to me is such a weird line that Riker would ever say. It doesn't make sense other than from a writer's perspective, burn the world. That sort of echoes remember the song at the start of the first episode, the world on fire, and
Yeah,
basically the terrorist attacks. I think that line to me only makes sense if the writers are actually talking about Vatic and Vatic's real motivation that is that she's protecting her children or her children were killed somehow by the Federation of Picard and
yeah.
that's Vatic's motivation.
And she's
To
willing to
me,
now burn the world to get vengeance or save them
or save
and that
them. That would be
and I think
more
that's
sympathetic.
yeah, and I think that's a good it follows well with kind of some of the lines that like you're saying outside of that being the reason for them don't make a whole lot of sense. So for Riker to say that, a little strange, and then starting the show with the, I don't want to set the world on fire, and it would all track as far as and we have been trying to figure out like what is Vatic's motivation, like what's actually going
Hmm.
on there. So yeah, I think that makes
And
sense.
that fits the way that they act, or that fits the way the writers might work.
Right, yeah, we've kind of made that
Because
comment a few times, and that like I think the writing, it's I'm always hopeful that a lot of the stuff the writers have done is like has multi-level, thought process going into it, but often some of it ends up being a little on the nose or a little more simple or less thought out than I would hope. Um,
or more from our perspective, we're trying to figure out stuff by thinking about a line the way the writer thinks about writing the line instead of
yeah,
thinking about the line within the episode. Because obviously Riker 15 years ago doesn't know about Vatic or motivation. Like that doesn't make any
right.
sense.
There'd be no reason for him to say
But
that.
it
And
echoes within the writing.
yeah, so it's funny. I think one time I was talking to Jeff. Tim has a brother named Jeff, and we talked about foreshadowing in literature and in films and television. Jeff was just saying he hates foreshadowing because it's not a realistic, like it's not in life you don't like have someone say something to like foreshadow like later that a big octopus is going to come attack you by saying like there are 8 things I hate. I don't know.
No, it's 100% true. And it's one of those weird things that makes sense to our brains in sort of na constructed narrative, but our actual experience of life is nothing like a narrative.
No, but I think it also adds to sometimes audiences, whether it's for theater or someone reading a short story, we like to kind of feel like we're smart and we can figure out what's
Hmm.
happening.
It makes
So
it
it
more
just,
satisfying.
yeah, it's a bit of a like a treasure, like you hear something and you think to yourself that might be foreshadowing, and when you connect it later, it gives you that kind of feeling of success that you've understood something the writer was kind of telling you without directly telling you. So I think it's more, you know, that's what it is trying to do versus being realistic. It's not about being realistic, that's for sure. So if Riker's saying this, as you picked up on, because I didn't pick up on this line really, but you picked up on it because you were like, huh, that came off a little weird. So that's when those moments happen in television, they're often a sign that like the writers are trying to tell us, not directly tell us something, but in maybe foreshadowing that they want us to
Hmm.
later think back and go, oh, that's why Riker said that. Maybe you're too smart for your own good, Tim. I don't know.
Hmm.
Too smart for the writer's good.
And a hero
who's,
shot
who's
of
that?
Picard.
Who's that guy?
Huh? He's a handsome young man.
Well, I think maybe while we have this photo of Picard, we can just talk briefly. I don't think we need to go into too much detail, but and I also just wanted to bring up Matthew also mentioned that the crew was more professional, but not sure which was more realistic, but that they preferred it. And because we were talking about how the crew is a little more whiny and whatnot, and maybe it's more realistic that the crew would be this way. But I agree, and so there's a reason for me bringing this up because Picard is a similar thing in that maybe Picard as a character, Jean-Luc, wasn't a super realistic character because he was almost too perfect. Like he made the right decision. He always had the right thing to say. He could always get people out of trouble. He could always convince even an alien race that they were in the wrong. Um, and was it realistic? Is that, can a person be like that? I don't know. But I loved that Picard. I loved the idea of this captain who was just very sure of himself, very capable, and really was a great leader. And I guess it's been a little difficult seeing um, a different Picard, like seeing a Picard who doesn't seem sure of himself, who seems confused, who seems to always be being yelled at and told not to do things. Like it's always like he's being
Hmm.
told, like, no, get out of here, stop it, you don't know what you're talking about. And it's just that's not now. Is it realistic that maybe an older Picard who's more separated from his career and he's yes, so maybe it is realistic, but is it? Do I prefer it? No, I'd probably rather see Patrick Stewart playing it a little closer to the confident, sure of himself. Even sometimes to his detriment, which is
Hmm.
part of
And
why
I
I think.
think we're still waiting for that sort of satisfying payoff of Picard being back that we've
I hope it
sometimes
happens.
seen touches on.
I hope it happens. Now, the other thing, one more thing before we move away from this, still, is there was one more reference in this episode to Picard being synthetic.
Oh, I missed it, I think.
Yeah, so I think it was something like, oh gosh, I should have written it down when it happened. But there was a reference to like in the flesh, and it was something like in the synthetic flesh or something. It was a throwaway. It was really quick, but I thought after like basically a full season of barely mentioning it, they've mentioned it in almost every episode now. And maybe it is because suddenly they're dealing with a son, so they could be thinking, well, wouldn't the son maybe be concerned, or would he have issue with his father like not being a real person, or I don't know. So anyway, they brought it up again.
Well,
And good
if
for
you
them.
mentioned the son, so we had the big reveal at the end of the last episode that Jack was Picard's son,
He is.
and I said at the time the writers need to make it make sense that there needed to be an
Why did
explanation.
she tell him? You mean specifically like why Beverly would not have told him and
Yes. So
like
what was
make
the
that make sense?
explanation for what happened?
Well,
And I
what
had
was
an
it?
idea of like, we were talking about there's a lot of weird stuff, time loops or genetic things, or like there's a lot of weird science fictiony things that could happen that might happen. And the worst case scenario in my mind was that they didn't even really address it and they just completely hand waved it. But she
I was
did give an
listening.
explanation, and I don't think I did not find it made any sense at all.
You were not satisfied with this explanation?
No.
Do you want
Well,
to talk a little bit about?
yeah. First of all, the the reason she left 20 years ago was because she had a son. So it wasn't like a separate thing. She left because it was 20 years ago's son. That also means Jack is basically 20 years old. She says 2 months before I left the Enterprise. She left the Enterprise 20 years ago. They keep saying 20 years ago. It could have mean 21, 22 years ago, the way that you say 20. That's been an ongoing problem in this season is that it doesn't really make sense that it's 2401 for various reasons. But either way, he's not much older than 20, and that's why she left. The explanation for why she didn't tell Picard is because Picard was having so many attempts on his life that it would be too dangerous for him to know he had a son.
Too dangerous for his son.
Too dangerous for his son.
Just in general, yeah, because she mentioned at one point, like, if anyone knew like who his father was, then he'd never. I don't know. Yeah, something about like basically your name is too much of a target. It would put like a target on his head.
Which, first of all, who's, since when does Picard constantly have attempts on his life?
Since he became an insurance agent.
No, well, the context is apparently, so this was during the period, this was 20 years ago, during the period where Picard supported the Federation effort to send ships to help relocate Romulans. And for
Yes,
some reason, everyone hates the guy who supports the Federation's effort to send ships to help the Romulans so much that they keep trying to assassinate him.
obviously.
I mean, there's so much about that backstory that doesn't make sense.
Yeah, and
But
then she. Yeah.
alternatively, sorry to interrupt,
No,
her
no.
decision
Please
to
do.
keep her son safe is to raise him to be an illegal arms dealer outside of Federation space. Again, this
Right.
guy's 20, barely 20 years old. He has a huge rap sheet. He's already murdered a guy at 20, and that's safer
That's safer.
than Picard in the
Knowing him.
Federation. Then again, Picard even knowing, she couldn't even tell Picard. So if you remember, I was watching Wrath of Khan relatively recently, and I noticed something I different than I thought before is that David Kirk knew about David Marcus's son. I always thought it was a surprise, but I was watching the Wrath of Khan recently, and it might have been the extended version with more scenes or something, but Picard seemed to have, or sorry, Kirk seemed to have known about David Marcus. He just agreed with Carol Marcus that it wasn't safe for him to be in his life, that he was too much of a captain, and that if they weren't going to live on the ship with him, they just shouldn't be. He couldn't be a part of his life at all.
Right.
So if that's true, then why can't she tell Picard about it and then convince him that it makes sense that he would be part of his life?
Yeah, that
So
does
that
make more
that's
sense.
why that's why I'm underlining that it's so dangerous that Beverly can't even tell Picard about him having a son.
Right. Which even based on so last they were together, we're to believe, they were close enough that they made a baby, which we all know isn't just a handshake. So there was a closeness there between them that was unlike any closeness that we really saw. We always saw that there was a bit of a, we knew there was love between them. Sometimes seemed plutonic,
Well,
sometimes seemed more than that.
in that
But
argument, they said they broke up 5 times.
sure. But so I guess what I'm saying though is that like that even makes it harder to believe that Beverly at this time just said, "Oh, I'm pregnant. The best thing to do is to literally like disappear and not tell anyone what's going on and not even involve Picard in the, maybe saying as you propose, maybe just saying I think it's safer if we don't raise him around you." And then Picard might have said, "Okay, that's fair. Like I am a."
Go off outside Federation space and be an illegal arms dealer in safety.
Yeah, I agree with that. I agree with that. Yeah, take him to do that. Take him on an adventure, Beverly. Now, do you want? So it doesn't all add up. It seems like Beverly's acting a little bit weird. Maybe she's, you know, is it a good excuse? Picard's pretty angry about it.
Yeah, and there
When
is, and they do touch on the accent too.
Oh, right.
Right,
Yeah.
a straight up accent. And to me, I feel
Does
like
he have an accent?
it would have been better if they just didn't address the accent, in
I
my
agree with that.
opinion. And then
Yeah, we
because
didn't
there's
need to.
always been a weird thing about people's accents on Star Trek, where a bunch of people have British accents for no reason. That seems to be a standard accent in space.
Well, what's funny too is like sometimes you can tell because at the end of the day, like Beverly Crusher's played by Gates McFadden. So like when she delivered the line, I almost could tell she didn't believe. Like she was just kind of like, "Oh yeah, yeah, he just went off for school and he just never lost the like."
Yeah,
I just could tell she
she
didn't even believe what she was
he went
saying.
to school in London.
Yeah,
And so I, by chance, was listening to a radio show today on how kids adopt the British accent while in London. And basically, they said the rules are that there's a pretty solid sort of study rules about it. If you're under 7 and you spend 3 years in a new place, and their example was actually particularly Britain, you'll get the accent. If you're over 14, it's too late in your life for you to really completely switch an accent to a new place that you've moved. So basically, meaning Jack, if this actually makes sense as an explanation, he would have either had to been under 7 and spent there 3 years, or between 7 and 14, but should have probably spent like 4 years in London. The reason I mention that stuff is that if this actually tracks, Picard's been on Le Bar on his chateau in France for the last 10 years, right?
right.
So there would almost certainly have been overlap where he was just going to school in London between, you know, being an arms dealer outside Federation space
Yeah,
and
and his dad was just
across the channel
super close by, making some wine.
making
He could
wine.
have given him. He could have gotten free wine while he was in school. No, wait, he would have been like you said, like super young.
In
Never mind. He's
Europe,
not really young.
though, everyone
True.
drinks wine at all ages.
Wine and cigarettes. Yeah. So a lot of that is questionable. And I have a theory, Tim. Did you know I
Hmm.
had a theory?
Do you have any theories?
Yeah. So I have a theory as to why maybe all of this is questionable and why it doesn't add up and why it doesn't add up. You want to hear it, or should I just keep it to myself?
No, go for it.
Okay. What if? So we know now that there are changelings involved in this attempt to, you know, steal a weapon and then steal a bigger weapon, which we'll talk about more here
Yeah,
soon.
we'll talk about that.
But they're involved. When you have changelings involved, it always then brings up the potential that a character isn't who they appear to be. And so I also realized that if Beverly knew, because she mentions in this episode that really they're not after Jack. Really, she suspects they're after Picard. Sorry, Vatic is after Picard.
Right. So she says that's. He's like, why? How could anyone be after Jack? And she's like, I think he's really after you. That's why I called you.
Right. So that then made me realize that was kind of mean of Beverly to call Picard knowing that she was putting him in a situation where he was going to be in a lot of danger and also that they weren't really after her and Jack anyway.
She
Um,
specifically lured him outside of Federation space
yes, exactly. So the other thing we
and
kind of
told him to tell nobody where he was going.
exactly. So what if Beverly is a changeling? What if Vatic, knowing that she wanted to make Picard vulnerable, knew that the one person that Picard trusts more than anyone, but also hasn't heard from for a while, for who knows why, maybe there's another reason that we don't know about yet. Maybe Beverly's been held captive or something like that, and that there's a changeling that is now playing Beverly and also potentially Jack. Maybe Picard doesn't have a son. Maybe this was all an attempt to make Picard vulnerable, get him out of Federation space, and put him in a precarious situation where he would then trust someone like Beverly. And maybe that, for that reason, Vatic's plan isn't necessarily to kill Picard, but to convince him through the son and Beverly to do something he would never do if it wasn't for having a son and having Beverly.
Right.
So maybe convincing him, let's say, to give over some kind of like codes to something really important, or, um, I don't know, but could that
And I
be?
should
Could
mention
Beverly
that
be a changeling?
that's very similar to the plot of the TNG episode with the rock climbing to fake sun, Bloodlines. But you know what? In that episode, I'm pretty sure it worked. Voth was able to manipulate Picard to act in protection of the sun and to act differently, to be vulnerable. It worked out of vulnerability.
Well, and also like what, dramatically speaking, how sad would it be for Picard to find out that after thinking he has a son and potentially getting closer to this son, that he then gets manipulated and maybe doesn't have a son? What kind
Again,
of
the second time.
yeah, what kind of dramatic arc would that create? Now, full kind of transparency disclosure on this theory is, I think, already has some, you know, um, I want to say not plot holes, but it has some holes in the.
Well,
And you
right.
brought
It
one of them
doesn't
up,
seem that Jack could be a changeling because he fights with the changeling later in the episode and is almost killed by him by that gas.
right? So could that mean that maybe only Beverly is a changeling, or that the changeling that tried to kill Jack
Didn't know he
was
was a
Beverly
changeling.
and
or
wanted Jack?
didn't or didn't know it was changeling. Because so changelings don't necessarily recognize other changelings. We saw that with Odo and other changelings.
Yeah, so that was what I was actually going to say,
Sometimes.
which is that maybe the other changeling wasn't privy to the high level security information, and Jack just came and started foiling this plan. Then the question would be like, why then Jack the changeling was going and trying to stop this leak from happening? Um, so yeah, but anyway, would that not make sense that Beverly, that this whole plot where we're kind of saying to ourselves, does like why wouldn't she tell him? And he's so mad about it, and maybe it's just because it's all a ruse.
To be honest, I like that better right now. Um, and Picard is pretty angry in this scene. He
Yeah,
doesn't,
he got really angry, and
and
rightfully so.
understandably so, because it doesn't make any sense. But Beverly says, "You always told me about how you hated your father." If you remember that.
Uh-huh.
And then Picard
Yep.
just says, "But if you told me about this earlier, maybe I could have resolved my issues with my father 20 years earlier." Which I thought was an interesting line because it was him basically saying, if you told me about my son, I wouldn't have had to go through what we went through in season two. I could have resolved that earlier, and we would have never had to have had season two because season two entirely just happened so Q could teach Picard to resolve his issues with his father.
So the writers of season 2 are blaming Beverly Crusher for season 2.
I, that's what it sounds like.
That's what it sounds like. So there's another theory.
And my other
But yeah,
note from this, like we touched on, it right now it does kind of seem that Jack pretty much is just a rock climbing David Marcus
yeah,
who's killed a guy.
all characteristics are like basically the same. But then I was saying too that like it always seems like writers, if a captain is going to have a child, like someone like Picard, they always have to be some kind of maverick who like can fight and is really smart and quick-witted. And I mean, I guess it does make sense that Picard's son might be, but he wouldn't have an English accent, I'm pretty sure.
Yeah. And she also says maybe it was DNA.
Even Picard shouldn't have an English. I mean, like that also had to
Yeah.
be like added in at a later time to be like, oh yeah, he has an English accent because and that was added in never in TNG. That wasn't until Picard, right? Like this show was it season 1?
No, in season two, they explain his British accent by saying one of
His family had
his
moved.
family during World War II lived in Britain. Therefore, he
Yeah,
has a British accent. I don't
yeah,
know how
that's
that's
how it
an
works.
explanation. I don't like it makes less sense than this accent.
It doesn't make sense, but wouldn't it be interesting if that's how accents worked? It was like just all about your ancestry. It had nothing to do with like where you learned to talk.
Well, I mean, it does in the context that it has a lot to do with the accents you hear as a child of your immediate ancestors raising you.
Yeah, that's okay. That's a good point, Tim.
What are we talking about accents? Again, I just think they shouldn't have referenced it. I think they should just like,
Matthew left another comment also. Sorry to interrupt you.
oh, go ahead.
I'll let you check it. You're
Oh,
the contact.
all of their backstories for the intervening years since Nemesis have been disappointing. Geordi is a super engineer who works at a museum. Um, yeah, well, to me, it's more just they haven't been fleshed out enough. The whole backstory of Picard and the Romulans, and remember, he was a very heavy-handed, uh, like a white savior, a failed white savior of the Romulans. Like there was definitely that dynamic, but they never fully explained what happened with the Romulans. Like I just feel like I'm still very confused about his backstory.
Yeah, so it does feel a little bit like people left the show alone for a while and then suddenly came back to it. A bunch of writers who didn't necessarily know the characters well and thought, well, we need some reasons why things have been happening and where people have been.
Yeah, but we'll see. We still have more to learn about
We still
characters. And there's a
have,
B plot with this one, and it is the Raffi and Worf. Raffi and Worf are partners now.
boo.
And I think they had a great dynamic together. Next shot, maybe just already with them together. So yeah, I think they had a great dynamic together. And I thought Raffi had a great dynamic with Seven in the previous season. Raffi works a lot better as with a partner, with someone to talk to and riff off of and sort of have sarcastic comments with, and sort of have a different way of talking, like a back and forth with. And I thought
Yeah,
they were great. My main criticism is that Worf should have been there from day one. Him pretending to be a different person and handling her, like, and then to have a reveal, like that didn't make any sense in story, and it wasn't to me. They should have started in the first episode as partners, and that just would have been
agreed. Yeah.
great. And this is way funner than her alone dealing with drugs.
Well,
What
none
do
of
you
that
think?
really made sense. Yeah, the whole like her. I'm glad that it seems like they've now finally left that behind. Yes, she talked to him about this drug because she thought he was having withdrawals. Turns out he was just a changeling. But um, I guess we can talk more about that. What I want to talk about quickly was when she first wakes up to meet Worf. So she wakes up and there's some opera music playing, and she picks up a gun and she's like, I'm going to attack this guy, and you don't sneak up on Worf. And
No.
so he swiftly disarms her, but doesn't kind of say like, hey, like don't mess with me. He basically offers her chamomile tea,
Oh,
and
I got his full line here.
yeah, so go through that because that was pretty great.
Worf, son of Mog, house of Martok, son of Sergei, house of Rozhenko, bane to the Doras family, slayer of Garon. And then he says,
Yeah,
would you like some chamomile
would you
tea?
like would you like some chamomile tea? And I was just remembering too from TNG. There's an episode where he drinks prune juice,
Yeah, he's really into prune juice.
and he calls it a
A
warrior's drink.
warrior's drink. Yeah. Do we want to
So
break down? Well, one thing I would say about that title is that he was Sergei Rozhenko always was really his father. So he was should have where it was always in the Klingon episode. It was always an important plot point that Moog was his father and sort of that thing, the political
yeah,
thing about Moog and Kittimer and the Duras family. But he, as an individual, probably would think of himself more as Worf, son of Sergei, House of Rozhenko. And
right.
I guess he's always sort of struggled with his Klingon identity, and now he seems much more confident in his identity and
Like
himself,
yeah,
and maybe
the whole thing.
yeah. So now he's confident enough to say the whole thing.
Yeah, I thought that was cool.
And of course, he killed Garon at the end of Deep Space Nine, tacking into the wind.
Yeah. So anyway, so I'm trying to remember. He introduces himself, offers
Hmm.
chamomile tea. They talk a little bit,
Oh,
but they're
the implication, I think, because he always listened to Klingon opera, of course, but the opera that we were listening to in that scene was a lot more like Italian opera, right?
well, yeah. I think it was one that Picard had showed him, or
Okay, maybe. So it
there
wasn't
was a
Klingon
connection
opera.
there.
It was real human opera. That
I
makes
think so. Yeah, I think that was like one of the connections there. I don't remember specifically, but um, yeah.
cool.
But anyway, so at a certain point, he says, "Do you want to be partners?" I forget how that happens. There's something where,
Yeah. Well, first he's like, you should stay behind. He says he uses the
right?
past
Okay.
tense. He says like, I'm gonna move on. You're gonna stay behind. I'm gonna keep fighting these people. And she's like, no, we should be partners. And then by the end of it, he's like, let's be partners. And she's like,
And then
yes,
she says, "No." She says, "Cool," and then she like
cool. Yeah,
smiles.
yeah.
Um, I wish I could remember exactly how that happened because I think he like he's either gets mad or like says something, and then you think she might react a different way, but she just says like "cool" anyway. And I mean, like, who isn't going to think it's cool to partner up with Worf? Like, anyone is going to think that. Anyone. So they deal with the changeling, who they initially don't think is a changeling. Now, I learned an interesting fact, which is the actor that plays this changeling played Picard's son in the Nexus when he had like the family at like the Christmas.
Oh, really?
Remember?
Oh,
Yeah.
the
So
next shot is a better shot of him.
yeah.
Oh,
So he
okay,
actually
yeah.
played. He was
That's
really
nice.
young at the time, but he
Yeah,
plays like
he had a
like blonde
Victorian
hair.
British family at Christmas for some reason in his ideal imaginary Nexus life.
Yeah, and this actor played the son, who is now playing, a different character. But I thought that was pretty cool, and that's a great shot of Worf, by the way. I think he just looks like
Mm.
so awesome, and I honestly think he might be in better shape now than ever. I think he's just looking top notch.
Yeah, he's in
Um,
form.
he's got his batleth on his um, back.
Not his batleth, his mech.
Oh, it's a different weapon.
Yeah, he's got a smaller weapon that he sort of prefers.
It's cool that he's like
Mechlek, Mechlek,
what is it called when you carry
Mechlek.
a weapon? No, but when you carry a weapon like that, what is it called? It's like
I don't
there's a
know
word
that.
for that. But anyway,
He
it's
had he
cool.
had a duck tag too earlier. He threw it.
Oh, the other kind of funny thing is there's a scene where I'm trying to remember where they are, but she says something to him like he says you look too conspicuous with your hood up. And then she says says the Klingon warrior standing in the corner or something.
Yeah. Oh, you remember we didn't meet it, but there was a big chase sequence where it seems like Worf has lost them, and he's like,
Yeah.
"Go, I can't see. Go there." And then all
Right.
along, Worf was like waiting for them, and so like he had like
Yeah,
been
Worf.
like messing with her the whole time, and
Yeah,
it was
he's
very fastly done, but I thought it was pretty funny and fun and well done. Like I liked
so that is when they capture this guy,
this
and then
guy.
they question him, and she thinks he's having issues with withdrawals. All of a sudden, his face does the morph thing where they're like, "Oh my goodness,
Mhm.
he's a
And
changeling."
I'm gonna be honest, I first thought Suliban. The effect to me first looked like Suliban. That was where my
Okay.
mind initially went.
Oh, just a
But
funny comment from Matthew says, "Every time Worf tells her she is a warrior, you have to take a shot." It's a new drinking game. I'll have to watch it again, and see. It must happen a lot because I feel
he
like he
did
already said it
he did at
a
least a
whole lot.
couple times.
Yeah, you are a warrior. What I wouldn't give to have Worf tell me I'm a warrior, but he'd just be like, "No, you are not a warrior." I shouldn't have hired
Well,
Worf to
you're a
talk to me.
warrior in your heart.
Right? Yeah, he would tell me that. And so just to finish off the whole Worf scenario, so they do discover that this changeling was working with somebody else who you said was of like mind or something. How did they explain
Yeah, so
that?
there's an important plot point there. I wrote it down. He admitted when he's talking about them stealing the weapon from the Daystrom Institute. He says he wasn't alone. He was working with someone, and they were
Yeah,
like-minded souls, enemies of the Federation.
right.
So that had to be Vatic. So that's the connection. Why Vatic had
Seems like it is. And then we also find out that in this episode,
security for the real thing.
yeah, why would they beef up security in a situation like that?
Yeah,
It doesn't make any
classic
sense. So,
move. And one thing
and
that's right is that Worf in this scene, he admits he already knew
I was
about the
just going to say
changeling,
that.
that
Yeah.
there was the a faction of the founders that were a splinter faction that didn't like the end of the Divinity War and were going to fight back. And he heard about it from Odo. He references Odo, his old friend, and he knew that all along and just hadn't told Raffi. He knew that there was potential that Raffi was going in with the job she was working on. She was going to encounter changelings, and she didn't. He didn't tell her before now.
Right. Not important information for her. Because literally in this case, I mean, I don't think that Worf is a changeling, but it could have been a thing where a changeling pretended to be a Worf and showed up and said Raffi, or pretended that's the thing when you start dealing with
Well,
changelings that Worf
anyone
knew
who
about.
hacked into their subspace communiques could have pretended to be Worf.
Yeah, so regardless, it was a little weird that after this guy looks like he's tweaking, but then suddenly he's a changeling, then he just melts away, and to me I was like,
And
oh
that,
my
and that
goodness,
tracks with what we've seen happen to Odo when he's had to sort of do the same thing.
recharge or whatever.
Every 16 hours, 18 hours, 22, I forget the hours,
Yeah,
but every
I don't know.
day basically
Yeah,
they sort of get all
he
sweaty and sick
loses his
looking.
form and stuff.
Yeah.
So yeah, so that made sense, but after this changeling reveal happened, what didn't make sense is that I thought both Raffi and Worf were going to be like, okay, now we know, but Worf was like, oh yeah, I knew. I knew, and I had talked to an old friend, and anyway, so yeah, that's pretty much catches us up on that scene. It's they know that changelings are involved. They know somehow connects to some, I guess, Vatic, um, and a bigger weapon and
Yeah.
a bigger, badder thing
So there's
happening.
another weapon that they're going back for that they don't know about yet.
Right. Good work, you and
I
I.
guess I didn't follow how they now know there's another weapon, but they didn't know before. But anyway, they're good. Their next episode, they're going to the Daystrom Institute, which is always fun. See Daystrom Institute.
Maybe that's where we see Brent Spiner.
That's a good place to see a Brent Spiner, I think.
Well, that's why when I said
Well,
Brent Spiner, not a character.
we saw B4 in a drawer. That wasn't the Daystrom Institute. That was the library. I forget what it was called.
Okay.
But it might have been part of the Daystrom Institute. Either way, there's lots of things we could meet at the Daystrom.
Well, we might also see Brent with LeVar. I feel like because they were such good buddies. Data, but I know it's not going to be Data, so like never mind.
Yeah, it might be Lore. Might be Moriarty.
Well, yeah, we got to see Moriarty too at some point.
Okay, but one thing is they know about the Founders, and at the exact same time, we learn about the Founders back on the Titan. Before this scene, something happened that I want to point out is when Jack is sort of getting around and he sort of figures out, no, it's actually Shaw initially says to Jack, how are they doing this? There's something
How do they
going
keep
on,
tracking us? How do they
which I
keep
thought was
tracking?
cool, or at least Shaw, I like the idea of Shaw and Jack, the two characters that everyone hates and everyone's blaming for being incompetent or getting them into the situation, could like team up and do it.
Yeah, and then
Although
I
he
noticed,
ends up teaming up with Seven.
and then I noticed too when he said that, when Shaw says, "How do they keep finding us?" Jack looks down at the trail of blood that came from Shaw, and that's kind of his way of being like, "We must be leaving a trail." And then, yeah,
Yeah, that's pretty good rating. But there's something that happened I thought was actually great. The first thing he does is he tries to go onto the bridge. And of course, a security guard stops him and says, "It's red alert. You can't enter the bridge in red alert," which is something that's always made sense. And every other Star Trek, people are always showing up on the bridge in the middle of red alert, and it never makes sense. I was just happy that someone finally said, "No, you can't go to the bridge." I know it was, self-serving in the plot for this one, but that was something I was like, finally, someone's actually
yeah, it does
respecting
make
red
sense
alert.
that would be that way. That you're not just going to be able to walk onto the bridge or off of the bridge during red alert. It's a heightened security setting. And oh yeah, I remember when I watched that moment when Jack goes to go, because in that moment Jack, from what I could tell, had some really pertinent information that the crew needed to know. Um, and so I didn't think he was going to give up so easily. Like he needed to get onto the bridge to say, "Hey, like I think we're being followed because I think we're leaking something." Excuse me. And like you said, it does serve the plot to, like, in that case, have a security officer saying, "It's red alert, you can't go on the bridge." I thought then Jack was just going to punch the guy and go on the bridge anyway and tell them because they needed to
Mm.
know.
Yeah,
But he
they did.
doesn't.
Well, they did need to know, and instead he goes to Seven, which
He turns
works.
around, walks away, and I was like, "What? He's walking away?" Anyway, yeah. So he goes to Seven. She's
But
also under
yeah,
lock.
yeah, and she is. And remember, so I was a little confused about why Seven was, because there was a season in the previous episode, I think, where Shaw just says, "Shouldn't you be confined to quarters already?" And then she goes, because she should have been confined to quarters earlier, but she kept leaving and going to talk to him.
Now there's security there though, so it's
And
harder to
now there's
leave.
security there.
I guess. I don't know. But anyway, this is the guy that Jack decides to knock out because he's like, "We're leaving," and the guy's like, "You can't leave your quarters," and so he punches that guy, but doesn't punch the guy to get on the bridge, which I think would have been a more effective punch because if he could have gotten on the bridge, he could have told everyone there. But anyway, who care? Not me. So Seven and Jack team up, and they realize that. So at first, he just has this theory, right?
Yeah, well, he doesn't. He's not an engineer. He doesn't even really know what's going on. But Seven's a good person to talk to. They figure it out. They've got to go see what's going on in engineering. They find sabotage, and that's enough for Seven to just use her communicator and tell the bridge
Yeah,
what's up. So there's,
right.
the engines were sabotaged so that they could detect. I forget the technical level, but something about
Yeah, the leak of,
emissions.
and then they identify that it was phaser fire that caused the leak. So that's when they're like, yeah, maybe you just mentioned that. Did you mention the phaser fire? And then they're like,
Well,
yeah,
I
it's
said I
someone,
said it was sabotage.
right, like the BC Boys song.
It's exactly like the Beastie Boys song.
I just wish that's what they had said in the episode. Instead of saying it's sabotage, someone just said like it's like that BC Boys song, and then the
But
person's
better
like,
in
you know what
I
he
remember
means?
in Undiscovered Country where Valeris did that big long speech about the brutes sabot. They threw them in there in the tools.
I don't remember this.
She does a really long-winded cultural way of like saying it's sabotage in one of the
Ah,
Star Trek movies.
it could have just been like it's like that Beastie Boys song.
Yeah,
We should
that's
have
a
been
good way
writers
to.
on the show, Tim. We should have been writers on the show.
Okay,
Um,
and so, but I guess what's sort of significant about that is that along this fight, he gets in a fight with the Changeling,
Sure does.
Learns out about changelings, and he gets injured, and for some reason there's gas. I don't remember the gas being explained. No, the gas was what was damaged,
It was what
what
was
was
leaking. Yeah,
sabotaged, so it was leaking. And
it will
by
kill
doing
you.
that, he gets in danger. And then Picard. Oh, we didn't mention the 17 seconds was something Riker said in the flashback. First thing he does is he tries to go to the bridge, and of course, a security guard stops him and says, "It's red alert." Hello? Sorry, my audio just screwed. No, that's my audio.
Did your audio screw up?
Yeah. Hopefully that doesn't damage it. I'm good now, but I've lost my headphones.
Your headphones aren't working now?
Yeah.
I might be echoing. Do you have other headphones you can put in?
Let me go. I could go grab something actually. Maybe while.
What should I talk about? Go to the next picture and I'll talk about the next still. Yeah, okay. I mean, it's the same plot, but let's just talk about that. Although I may be echoing, so I apologize if I am. But yeah, he ends up in the sick bay, which actually earlier, I think it was earlier in this episode, Beverly gets scolded by the doctor. I think it's one of the doctors in sick bay, and she's basically told not touch any of the stuff because things have advanced and the equipment isn't the same, but she clearly doesn't listen and starts administering help to a lot of people, which makes sense. And actually that in itself was a little bit weird, that this medical professional, knowing that Beverly was like a legend in medicine, could help deal with some injuries, but she was like, we don't want you to help deal with injuries because you don't know how to use the equipment. She does know how to use the equipment.
The doctor was a jerk too. I guess Shaw sort of cultivates a jerk work culture.
In this case, yes. But anyway, so here's so we almost lose Jack. He almost dies.
But Picard gets his 17 seconds going down the turbo lift.
Yeah, the longest 17 seconds. Because Riker talks about that, right? Taking the turbo lift when he had to go, when he heard that his son was born, and then Picard has to take that same turbo lift to check on Jack. And they're trying to restart his heart because his heart has stopped. And so what happens?
Well, he doesn't die. He's okay.
Okay. Whew. I was nervous for a second.
And that sort of comes to like the main sort of, I think, the A plot of this story, which was the dynamic between Riker and Picard up on the bridge and what they're doing. So meanwhile, on the bridge, they're running from the Shrike, Vatic ship, and
they're running from Shrek.
The Shrike, and the Shrike keeps catching up to them because of the sabotage, and ultimately, then the Shrike starts using this really crazy weapon. Actually, we got a picture of that.
Which is the same weapon that seemed to be used for the terrorist attack.
Yeah,
this
the portal, and it's really cool. Like it was a cool setup, and it's a really sort of way. She's clearly Vatic's clearly toying with them. She's so powerful.
Yeah,
sort of
they try to go to warp at one point, and then they just end up in the same spot. They try to fire some photons and end up hitting themselves.
So that's how it ends with that dynamic. But in this sort of situation where they're pretty much outmatched and in trouble, there's well, we didn't talk about Shaw when he was sidelined. We talked about Shaw when he was gone, but Shaw when he's sidelined, he leaves Riker in command. So he very
which also
just picks out. But I think if you're not going to tell a story about Shaw, get him out of there and let Riker and Picard be leaders. But Riker's captain, and he was number one.
Riker's captain, and Picard is number one. And he says that. He says, well, because at this point they're getting along, and he helps them. He's kind of like sitting in the number one chair, the first officer chair, and says, I think it's time you called me number one. And I didn't like it because it goes along with what I've struggled with in the new seasons of the show, and still is that Picard doesn't feel like Picard, and he feels too much like second string. Like he's not the main guy. He's not like the show's called Picard, but he's always kind of like being told to frig off, and like he's in the way or he's making the wrong decision. And that turns out to be the case here because he's suggesting we need to fight. We can't just keep running. We can't hide. We need to fight. And Riker's the one saying, no, that's stupid. We need to
Well, Riker's
Hide,
being very
protect the
parental.
ship.
He wants to protect the ship. But he's
Yeah,
also, I noticed in all those sort of that discussion, which they're having pretty heated discussions right in front of the crew, right in front of the bridge crew, what Shaw was doing that I thought was so shocking.
another one of
Great
those like
mentioning that.
unprofessional.
Yeah, it seems like usually they go to the ready room to do those discussions, and we've seen that many times and them talk about that. But Riker seems really undecisive and unconfident as a captain, which to
Yeah,
me didn't really seem like the way Riker would act. And he,
well, they both, right? Like both him and Picard were just kind of like
but at least
not
in
sure.
this kind, in this argument, Picard's the one who wants to make a stand and fight. And Riker's the
True.
one who's like, no, I don't think we can do that. We have to hide and try to
Yeah,
sneak
yeah,
away.
true. Yeah.
And but he also is really indecisive about doing it. He doesn't just say do it. He sort of just argues with Picard over whether he should do it. He's not
Yeah,
decisive
they
at
just
all.
argue. Yeah,
And I was
we
thinking,
can't do it.
well, what ultimately happens, as you touched on, is Riker is planning to warp away and get away and save everyone, and then the last minute, the engines are damaged. It's because of the saboteur, basically. But the engines are damaged, so he can't warp away. So he's forced to listen to Picard's instructions of fight back. This is our only chance because they've just turned off the saboteur blood trail, so they can, in theory, spin around
Kind
and
of.
unexpectedly shoot them in the back, basically.
Yeah.
And so he's sort of forced to do that because the engines are done. So Riker he decides to do it. He makes the order of fire,
Mhm.
but the Shrike was
He didn't
ready.
really have a choice.
He didn't have like, but he didn't have a choice. But he did do it. He was told he made the order to do it. Stryker was
Yeah.
ready for it. They opened the portal thing, and then the torpedoes
Striker.
go. That's kind of cool. Riker
you
meets
mix
Stryker.
you mix up Riker and the Shrike.
And the torpedoes go through the portal, and it comes back out, and it hits the ship, and
It's them.
basically it's like we're destroyed, we're screwed. And then Riker is so angry, he kicks Picard off of the bridge for
Yeah.
making and blaming. He said, "You made the wrong call. It's your
You killed
fault."
us all.
Yeah, which
Yeah.
that sort of I just didn't believe Riker would do that. I don't just on the basic level of Riker as a captain wouldn't listen to a suggestion that was to make the call and then blame the person who made the suggestion for the call.
Yeah, exactly.
Like that's just
He
not his
had
character. Nor would that be what Picard would ever do to Riker.
no, it didn't follow how they would act. It didn't follow the responsibility that Riker would take. That at the last minute he had really no choice and was like, okay, we got to fire on them. But then when it doesn't work out, which like it had a good chance, regardless, it had a good chance of not working out, even if they didn't have this weird portal weapon. Like the ship, they already were told several times that they were outgunned. Remember when Vatic had this like scene where the whole scene is just her saying, "I've got this many weapons and I can kill you this many ways,"
Yeah,
basically.
that's been established that
So
they're clearly outgunned.
they're clearly outgunned. So, but they're also they've tried to run and they've seen that they have a portal weapon that keeps bringing them back around. So what choice did they have? So it's just really annoying because then Riker's like, okay, they try to sell it like Riker's saying, okay, fine, I'll do what Picard wants. But at this point, you can't hide anymore. Like you're no longer able to
Hmm.
hide. They're gonna find you. Like he had to do something. So it didn't work. So then now it's Picard's fault, and he's like, get off the bridge. You killed us all. And then
I just
Picard
didn't believe it for Riker.
doesn't defend himself, doesn't say, just is like trot, like kind of with his tail between his legs, walks off the bridge. It's like anyway, yeah,
And
I wasn't.
the problem is, and it occurred to me that the whole dynamic would make way more sense for the characters flipped. Because Riker does not have a son on the ship. Riker,
Yeah,
the only connection we have is to Riker's son Thaddeus, who was that flashback that Picard was remembering at the start. Riker wasn't remembering that. That was
yeah, I
all.
wasn't thinking about his
That
son.
was all Picard. So there's no connection with Thaddeus with Riker right now at all with his son who died.
Right.
So that doesn't Riker has no motivation to be protective, like parenting in that way. But if Picard had had that 17 minutes earlier in the episode, so he sort of was forced to sort of come to terms with him being a father, and then felt like that sort of I've got to protect my son, and
Mm,
then he was the one who was in command because he's the admiral, he took command.
mm-hmm.
Riker was the number one. Riker's the seat of your pants. Let's face them and fight and make a last stand suggestion. Picard's the parental one who wants to protect everybody.
Yeah.
Things go sideways. He does what Riker wants, and then it'd be much more believable to me that Picard, in that state, and the way we've seen his character develop at that point, would be like, get off the bridge, Riker.
Mm.
Like I just
Yeah.
that would still work with me, and it would work better with just the dynamic of who actually would be feeling that feeling at the time.
Yeah. That does make sense. It almost seems like they got the character motivations and the emotional arcs reversed, like backwards. Because you suggest that makes a lot more sense. Like it makes a lot more sense that Picard would be protective because, like you said, if that had happened earlier, he almost loses his son. He realizes you can't be by the seat of your pants. You have to be careful. You have
And
to
maybe he
protect people.
overcompensates a little bit and
Yeah, you
feels
can't let
guilty
the
about the whole situation, about him putting the whole crew in that situation.
Yeah, then he has motivation to actually get more mad at Riker if Riker was pushing to fire on the vessel because he would be like, no, like you've done this to me and now I can't protect everyone, Like he would kind of lose his cool and be like, it was my
Yeah,
job to protect
so
everyone.
it would be
And basically,
acceptable for the pathos of the character at that time.
well, yeah, because there'd be subtext, and the subtext
Mm.
would be, it's my job to protect everyone. The subtext is, it's been my job to protect Jack, but I haven't been there for him.
Yeah,
And so now
exactly.
I'm overreacting because I'm truly, as a character, feeling angry at myself for not being able to be there for my son. But now I feel like I haven't been there for this ship, and I caused them all to potentially now be sent to their deaths. So that, like, and then him getting mad at Riker, then Riker even later might understand, okay, he was like emotionally heightened in that moment. But as it stands, it's for whatever reason Riker's the one that wants to be protective and almost fatherly of the crew. Picard's the one
They
that wants
haven't
to just like
developed
throw
why
them into
Riker would feel that way at all.
or why Picard in this situation would just kind of be saying like, let's just fight them, like over and over again, just pushing them to like engage. Oh, sorry, I don't mean
Yeah,
engage like engage, but like really,
that seems the opposite of the story they're telling about Picard right now.
yeah,
Maybe
I
they
agree with.
accidentally switched lines. Maybe there's like a copy paste error when they printed the
Can
scripts
you
and no
imagine?
one noticed it. Because again, but there's still the fundamental problem though is that Jonathan
I'm kidding,
Frakes also directed this episode,
right?
and I really think Riker's acting very wrong in this episode. So there has to be a reason.
Yeah, so you feel like maybe there's something going on with Riker, and I think
There's something with Riker. There's something going on with
well,
Riker,
could
and there's two options as I see it.
okay, they are.
I think we're ready to talk about that. Well, first of all,
Let's
there's been hints at some issues with some problems at home with his daughter and
yeah,
with
episode one, he brought that up, didn't he?
yeah, in a sort of a very awkward way between some jokes, but there's definitely something there. So
Yeah,
there's something going on with him and his family. We don't know, that hasn't been expanded on, but that may explain like why he's acting so weird.
yeah.
And alternatively, he could have been a changeling all along,
Mm.
and that's
Someone's
why
a
he's
changeling.
someone's a changeling, and that would actually make more sense. That's why he's like, oh, I'm not getting along with Deanna. Don't call Deanna or ask where I am or anything.
Yeah, good point. I wonder if and the thing with changelings too is sometimes you might think because if we look back at Riker's arc since Picard's been with him, does it all add up that he would be a changeling? But even if it doesn't, a changeling could essentially swap themselves in for a character at any point and take that character hostage. So it doesn't need to be that Riker's been a changeling the whole time. Maybe once they got into contact with the Shrike, maybe one of the changelings like beamed over, beamed Riker off, and took over. You know what I mean? Oh shoot, did you lose the earphone again?
I'm good. I can still
Is
hear
it
you.
coming through your earphone?
Yep.
Okay, sweet.
I'm just
Yeah,
switching.
because I guess I was echoing at one point because of the earphone issue, which now we at least know that's what causes it.
No, we're good.
It wasn't a leak in the deuterium or whatever the chemical was that
Ethereum?
caused
Uh,
it. It wasn't deuterium. I forget what the chemicals. I should go
yeah,
look
so
it up.
that's happened before. Bashir spent at least half a season kidnapped and on basically a prison colony while a founder version of him was wreaking havoc. Spoiler
Could
alert.
right, but it
Something that
could that
happened
could be what's
25
going
years
on.
ago. Yeah, and I
Like
mean,
with
you don't include changelings without that. That was the fun thing about changelings, is that
yeah, it is
it was
fun.
like that
Yeah,
movie, The Thing, the John Carpenter
right,
movie.
exactly. It's always like who is the alien now?
That's yeah.
So it makes it fun because you're always guessing and in this case, I do believe that we probably will find out that somebody beyond. I mean, it could just be that the only changeling was the one on the ship that attacked Jack. I mean, it's possible.
And
Um,
we could still have that dynamic. arise from there being
Yeah.
that one changeling.
Right, exactly. Because that one changeling is still not captured. Like they don't know where that one is, so they could just pop up and be Riker in a later scene too, or Picard or
Mm.
whatever.
And it could be used to sort of resolve some of their issues, the
Yeah.
trust issues.
But back to kind of, so if that is the case, so the two theories of why Riker's acting strange is potentially maybe Riker is a changeling, maybe Riker is just dealing with some emotional issues based on the situation that he brought up with his home life, and kind of mentioning like, oh, she'd probably be glad I'd be gone anyway, something to that effect. We'll see. I don't know. I think for some reason I don't think Riker's a changeling.
Well,
I'm
there
not sure
is
why.
lines in this episode that he has with Picard, and then later on there's a
With
one-on-one with
Jack,
Jack where he
yeah,
talks
you
about
brought
the
that up.
past. Yeah, it doesn't. It just those weren't things that a undercover changeling would bother doing. He wouldn't
Right.
try to like know about the feelings that Riker had about Picard and Beverly's relationship and have
Yeah,
that
it's pretty
one-on-one with
detailed.
Jack. Like, there's no reason a Picard, a real changeling, would risk that. But
No.
at the same time, we have this dynamic of what are the things that the writers mean to hand wave, and what are the things that the writers want us to pay attention to, because we don't
Yeah, it
have a
hasn't
good
been consistent,
sense of
unfortunately.
what matters for these writers. So,
Yeah, so it is still possible that that was just a way of them being like, well, he's going to be Riker now, even though he's a changeling Riker, but not thinking about the fact that like the audience would go, in hindsight, there's no reason a changeling Riker would have had that conversation.
and there's
But
other
it
things I
does,
haven't tracked. I don't want to spend too much time with it, but they mentioned again in this episode, Beverly did the Fenris Rangers, the Klingons, and the Federation. But if you remember
yeah,
in the flashback at the start of the previous episodes, 2 weeks ago, even though they've been on the run for months from these people, those
yeah,
Fenris Rangers, um, they did not seem like they were changelings. They seemed to just be corrupt Fenris Rangers who knew that someone they referred to as the marked woman was looking for this guy,
looking, yeah, yeah,
and that they were just getting money to tell her that where he was. It did
yeah,
not seem
yeah,
like
it
they,
did
because
seem
if
like
they were
that.
changelings, they would have been on a mission to get him as changeling. So why wouldn't they have just taken Picard's son there?
Right? Why would they just give the information to?
Yeah,
And then if it was changelings pretending to be Fenris Rangers that hadn't met the marked woman yet to like be hired by her, then why were they pretending to be Fenris Rangers robbing a
yeah,
ship? Like why would they just go and be who like? I mean, I guess maybe they would when changelings are in their normal form, like not pretending to be something else. They look like Odo, right?
yeah.
That's
They, I think that's more for us, the audience. But the ones we have seen just look like it's sort of implied
kind
that
of
that's an
clay.
easier situation. That it actually takes a lot of energy for them to pretend to be someone constantly, and that's
Yeah.
and they've touched a little bit on the idea because Odo could never do it. Odo could never do
Or a
that
dog.
detail of being a
Could be a
person.
dog.
Um, Odo could look like a dog or a rat maybe, but he couldn't
No,
look
but
like a
there was
person.
a TNT episode where there was like a shapeshifter that was a
Oh yeah,
dog.
that wasn't a founder changing. That was like a mutagenic species, and it wasn't
That
smart.
freaked me out. I
It
remember
was
that
like an
episode scared
animal.
as
Yeah,
a
that
kid.
was
I
a
was like,
scary thing.
my dog could be an alien. Oh my
Yeah.
god.
There's been a
Anyway,
couple other changelings we've encountered. But yeah, no, it sort of implies that a changeling who's like on deep cover had to do a lot of training to be able to to look like different people. And it
yeah.
actually takes a lot of energy from them to keep that up.
So they wouldn't
So
necessarily just go as a Fenris Ranger just
no, that
for the
doesn't
sake.
like unless they were on a very specific mission. But because it also is they kind of they value themselves very much. They think of themselves as gods and superior to solids. So if they're
Right.
going on their undercover mission pretending to be a solid, it's really important. It's to control like huge political stuff. So they're going under a certain important mission.
Yeah.
Them just being a Fenris Ranger who just noticed that that Jack was there just
Right.
doesn't track, is what I'm saying,
Right.
as them being changelings.
Gotcha.
But again, I think it's strongly implied that the Finnish
We're
Rangers, the
supposed to be
Klingons,
changed.
and Starfleet were the changelings. So it's not like they actually care. The writers are actually not putting that much detail into that type of consistency.
Yeah, like they're just looking at like it's more of a of a you've mentioned this before, writing back or working backwards and being like we had a line where Beverly says don't trust anyone, and then from there they just like worked in stuff in the plot where like it made sense that these changelings were also the reason why she said that, because she was like they could be anyone because they showed up as this and this.
And I
So
mean, your
then,
point was excellent. I didn't actually thought about that, but the fact that she thinks that there's people who are really powerful who can manipulate the other people, and they're actually after Picard. Her instinct to lure Picard out of Federation space and tell him to not tell anyone is pretty low down. Like it's as low
it's
down
a
as
little weird.
having a kid and not telling him. Um,
And there's some stuff not adding up. So let's. I think this
mm,
is the thing. This has happened to us before. Stuff doesn't add up, and then we come up with all these theories about like what it might be, and then it turns out sometimes that it's just like lazy writing.
it's just like, Q. Even gods have favorites.
Right. So hopefully that's not what's going on here, but
Mm.
we shall see.
And I mean, the thing, like, and you touched on this earlier, I think that if the founders, if they wanted to, if the goal was, if they don't actually care about Jack, they actually just want to get Picard, and it's just to lure Picard or to get through to get to Picard. Why don't they go after Picard? He's just chilling on Earth on his chateau.
Vineyard.
He's just chilling on the vineyard. He's about to take a ship to go because Laris had a new job somewhere. Remember?
Yep.
So that's a perfect opportunity to just swing by and pick up his ship
Here's the
and
thing though.
kidnap him.
If so, that's where I think the Beverly theory comes in because if somebody bad wanted to, if they wanted to kill Picard, they could have killed him, right? Like if that was the goal to just assassinate him. Well, I guess a lot of people have been trying to assassinate him for a while and failed, but like I feel like they could. They have a portal weapon. They could portal him into space. Like I don't know, but not if there was a bigger plan to not just kill Picard, but to
Peck at him.
like
Remember?
almost
That's what
yeah, true,
that's
true. Like peck at him, embarrass him, make him feel hopeless, like make him feel worthless, like do something really evil. Then, take the one woman that he like loved the most, say you had a child with her, have her like bring you like all the way here to put in danger like a crew and like one of your best friends, and then use that as a way to control you and make you like do something that you never would have done if we hadn't said you're doing it to protect your son or whatever it is. So like yeah, I don't know, I mean again, I think it's more likely that that's not what's going on, but it would be pretty interesting and devastating for Picard for sure. So
yeah. I don't know because I don't know where they go after this with him having a son because it kind of then it becomes the David Marcus thing again. Now he's really is the best way to have a reaction out of Picard is for him to really care about a person that he thinks is his son, and then for him to die, and then he's super vulnerable, like Kirk was in Star Trek Three.
I don't think he'll die though. If Jack is his son, I don't think that will be where this goes. But unless he
I
is.
think Beverly must die then, so that Jack can.
Well, I feel like, so here's the weird thing too, because I feel like, well, I don't think anyone that loves the TNG crew and wanted to see them again ever wanted to see any of them, that they're the way the writers would deal with them is to kill them off somehow. Like
I
that's,
think, but they're saying someone's going to die. I don't know if that's a fact or what, but that's the rumor.
well, I don't love that, but like because it doesn't. One of the great things about television shows and characters you love is they don't ever need to die because you can just go back and watch reruns, and that's part of like the magic of TV. So then when you take and I brought this up with Steven actually. I've talked to different people about how like maybe that's part of why watching Picard get really old, because everyone else, Riker, Crusher, they all at Worf, they all feel young enough that they almost feel similar to who they were, but Picard is the oldest and kind of feels the most frail, and it's almost hard to see a character like Picard that frail and knowing that he's really old and probably not going to be around much longer.
Because the other two we've encountered so far are Beverly and Worf, of course, and we both of them seem more active than they used to be. I mean, Worf always was pretty active, but he seems extra like jumping around, throwing swords, throwing daggers, and
Well, they just seem pretty close to who they were. Like they could
yeah,
still. I feel like for Worf, for Beverly, for
Beverly was doing more
even
action than she ever did in the show.
yeah, but even Riker, like I feel like the three of those actors, and I guarantee LeVar Burton's in great shape, and Brent Spiner is a little bit older too. But regardless, like they could probably have another like 10 seasons of a show or something. But we know that Patrick Stewart can't. Like he's the one that kind of can't keep doing. Like he probably wants to retire, to be fair, from acting
Yeah.
at some point,
I mean, this is
and he deserves to at some point. But I guess what I'm saying is, it's for that reason, it's almost like harder to see Picard, and maybe it would. That's why it would help for him to be a little more um, confident and determined, because then it's like, okay, just because he's old doesn't mean he's like irrelevant. Um, but anyway, what I was going to say though is like if someone's going to die, which again I don't love, it can't really be Picard because he's synthetic, but it could be
yeah.
if
They
like,
already did the Picard dies thing.
oh, true, well, true. And who was it? I forget that was saying that when Picard became synthetic, they said no, but he's like a normal. He's like synthetic.
Yeah, they did. They hand waved it
He
like
will
you're
die
synthetic, but you're gonna die normal death in
normal.
20 years or so, and
Yeah,
your body's like not as special in any way.
yeah. So I mean, it could be. I feel like it
It
probably
just
will be
would be,
Picard.
yeah. To me, it would be a cop out for him to ultimately die again after they did an entire arc about
Well,
that.
it
Oh,
wouldn't even be
Matt,
as impactful. Oh, sorry.
yeah, not as impactful. I completely agree. Matt just made a good point back about Jack. He said, I found it suspicious that they never mentioned doing a paternity test to Jack.
That's a
This
good
is
point.
one thing in Star Trek. This is solved through technology, but also a paternity test as a plot device in shows is usually very decisive. And if I remember in the Bloodlines, the Bach episode, they did a paternity test, and the ultimate thing was that Bach had like stuck him with a needle that like messed with his DNA, and she says like, yes, he is your son, but then she like brackets Beverly, but then she like brackets it as like there's something a little weird about his DNA, and then throughout the episode she does more research and realizes that it was he was infected by this DNA bug that made it look like he was
Right.
his son. So what I was saying is that if they did a paternity test and it was like, yeah, he's definitely your son, that would be conclusive. But the fact that they haven't done that and used the common plot device that shows like this would use Star Trek would usually use is suspicious.
Yeah, although I think like in some ways Beverly Picard doing a paternity test implies that he doesn't trust Beverly, and I don't know if he's at that point, right? Like I think he does trust Beverly. Like I don't know
Yeah,
that he should trust her.
yeah. I don't think there's doubt in Picard's mind right
Yeah, so for him to like just picturing him bringing that up with Beverly and saying, "Okay, he's my son. I want you to prove it." Like I think even though he probably should say that, and he probably because he's angry, and he'd almost be like, I don't necessarily believe that that's my son. But yeah, it would change. I guess what it would do is it would create another kind of dynamic between Picard and Beverly that like then the writers would have to deal with. It's like he doesn't trust her.
now. Mm.
But I mean,
I'm just saying it does seem like there's still potentially more to come.
that's what I was just yeah. So there's I think potential that he isn't his son, and that there is something sketchy going on that like tests might prove whether it's proving the DNA doesn't match or that this is a changeling or that
They take the DNA
um,
and it turns into changeling goo.
yeah. Then they're like, oh, this is actually a changeling. I don't know why I took so long to say that.
Do we have a problem that the kidnapped changeling um had cuffs on and that seemed to work? Between physical cuffs have never worked on a changeling before.
Yeah, it's a little weird.
He could have just morphed away. If he was gonna fall apart and turn into goo anyway, he could have done that earlier on.
He seemed pretty uncomfortable in that situation, like uncomfortable enough where like I feel like he would want to escape and maybe use but maybe it's because he was being guarded. Like Worf was like right there watching. Although I assume
Well,
Worf wasn't there the whole time.
There we do know there was some technology that the Tal Shiar had developed. No, not the Obsidian Order had developed that could that could basically was a force field that would prevent the shapeshifter from the changeling from morphing. So if
Escaping.
they
Oh,
put that in, like it's a possible technology we've seen before that if
yeah.
Worf had known about that the guy was a changeling, he might have already included in the cuffs.
Yeah, I
But then
mean,
he does morph while he has the cuffs on, so it wouldn't be exactly the same technology.
true.
Anyway,
Well,
that's sort of a side
I
thing.
think
I
it's
don't think
lazy
it's
writing.
too important.
It's not too important. No, it's like whatever. Like you could explain it several ways. It's maybe not the best. It would have been better if Worf knew about it and then she said, like, you think about it this way, like writing backwards. If she had said afterwards, "Wait, Worf, how did you keep him in cuffs?" And Worf was like, "Well, I did know, and I put him in the special cuffs for changelings." And then like the writers are like, "There, we dealt with it."
But Worf, why did the changeling have a British accent?
He went to school in England. Okay. Now
Where
it
he
all.
went to a school in England where there was a 19th century Christmas. I
Yeah,
was trying to
exactly.
connect the actor's backstory. Yeah,
Father, where are we going to eat a turkey for Christmas? Yes, son. I don't know. Yes, son is like the much worse accent. Doesn't sound like Picard at all. But anyway, yeah, we've all got British accents. They're all from going to school, and we're all changelings.
I think there's a
So
good chance Riker is a changeling at this point,
okay, well, I think it's Beverly. You wanna put a bet on that? No, I don't. I feel like it probably is more likely Riker, but because there's
maybe.
more reason.
I prefer Beverly. I think because I do kind of think that the way Beverly's
Tim,
character's
what
acted.
if the whole crew are all changeling?
And that's why, what if all of Starfleet is changelings? And that's why they've been so incompetent.
Or the whole thing's on the holodeck and Riker is just watching.
Because that's how that's how all TV Star Trek series have to end now.
Yeah, exactly. So there we go. There you have it, and there we have it, and there you are it.
All
Do we have
right,
another? We
so
had a final photo, didn't we? Final still of Vatic.
yes, do we have anything else to say about?
I don't know. I think we've covered a lot. We've been going on for. We've
Oh
been
yeah,
going on.
they're
Oh,
already
there's the
talking about
argument between
B2. Yeah, they're talking.
where
Yeah, and just I know, but
Riker's just
yeah,
like,
and yeah,
get out of here.
he's in the cat. Riker's in the captain seat, but Riker looks less sure of himself, and Picard looks more active even in just
Kind of, but I mean, they both look a little uncomfortable.
that shot. Looks like we'd rather be somewhere else. Well, oh, we never talked about
Oh,
Simone. Sorry, Sydney
Serenity,
LaForge. Sydney LaForge.
Sydney LaForge,
So she had a
and
moment
her.
earlier on. This was before Seven joined up with Jack, but they had sort of a moment together where she expressed like support for Seven, and so Seven, she said Seven did the right thing by helping her friends.
Yeah, it's kind of a nice scene, and you see um, outside of the A plot a little bit of character development and movement, which is nice to see. She
From
tells
some of
Seven.
the
She
other
she
characters.
calls her. What does she call it? Commander.
Yeah, she calls her Commander Seven, I think. She uses
Which,
her preferred name.
but that's like a kind of a sign of respect, right?
Yeah.
And like being saying like I'm on your side, and like because remember the crew wasn't allowed to call her Seven because Shaw like didn't like that she had been a um,
An
Borg
ex-Borg?
or
Yeah,
something.
which
Yeah,
to me is because they pretty strongly imply prejudice against ex-Borg as an analogy for racism or transphobia. So to
right.
me, that's pretty dark the way he's.
Yeah, him forcing her to like go by a name that she didn't want to go by is pretty friggin' uncool. So yeah, they set up Shaw being like so evil, and then he just was like, "Get me off the bridge, I'm hurt." Riker, you're the captain. So I don't know. He's kind of a funny character, but kind of not the best. It'd be funny if we just don't see him ever again. It's just, and then like they don't even bring it up. Like they just never bring it up again.
Right, captain. Yeah, and the question is when he does come back and how that happens because he seems pretty
Yeah,
injured and
is he just gonna? I mean, he's not happy ever. He's generally not a happy guy.
no,
But I feel
well,
like
I kept expecting to get a backstory for him to explain why he like has because remember there was that in the previous episode, Vatic references his like mental or his
oh
stress
right,
issues or
yeah,
something.
yeah, that he was like borderline like unfit to command or something, or that Starfleet was going to remove him or something like that. Yeah, yeah, yeah. But I don't think we'll get. I don't think we'll get much
This is the
else.
end of them. All right, well, but that's I do like Sydney, and I don't think this is LeVar's Burton, real daughter. We were
Well, I
speculating
mean, I
that.
can look it up even just on IMDb. I think I already did, but I
Yeah, I
forgot
think
to
we
check.
already. I
Should have
think
checked
yeah,
that.
you can just see who Sydney LaForge is, but I think he's other because
His
Geordi
daughter is
LaForge
going to
has
be.
his two daughters that we're going to see. I think the other one, maybe a smaller role, is his
Yeah,
actual.
so her name is Ashley Sharp Chestnut, the actor that's playing Ensign Sidney LaForge. So it is not um, LeVar Burton's daughter.
Yeah. Which makes sense. We just were because we saw that character first. We speculated about
Yeah. I was just curious. Well, because you had mentioned that his daughter was going to be in the show, and I was excited to meet her. But I'm also excited to just see Jordy. We
it.
still
Yeah, I'm
haven't seen,
excited.
and yeah,
So I think we've
and
wrapped up the episode,
then meet
directed by Frakes. I feel like we've been more critical than I probably was of the episode, because the problem with this episode is I think the actual core of the dynamic of being parental versus fighting, similar to the core of the previous episode's dynamic, which was uh, to risk the crew or not risk the crew for one guy who might be a jerk or might be a criminal, and that's sort of a classic character arc conflict of a Star Trek episode. And I thought that fundamentally was written well, even if I struggled with the resolution of it, and maybe thought it worked better if they flipped roles. I think overall, I think it was a well structured episode.
yeah. So well, that's why. Like I think early on, I gave it like a 7 or an 8 out of 10.
You said eight, yes.
So and maybe that was a bit like a bit high for because if I'm rating a 10, like if 10 is like the best TNG episode, then I can't give it an 8 because like there's so many TNG episodes. But if we're rating it based on just Picard seasons 1 through 3, then I would give it an 8 in that setting, and then I would give like the last episode maybe even higher rating.
Yeah, I think the last
Um,
episode was better. Like we had less sort of like
yeah,
about
but I
the
still look. So I think it's a good point though because we have been a little critical of just some of them
nitpicking.
a bit of the lazy writing or some of the things that don't really add up. But like overall, as an episode, it accomplished its goal. It was an enjoyable watch. It didn't try too hard to be like action heavy. We got to see characters interact. They're still on the ship. They're on a bridge. Picard may not be the captain, and he may be getting yelled at by Riker, and Riker might be acting a little weird. But overall, it's nice to see them on a bridge. It's nice to see them dealing with um, getting out of a difficult situation. They're not using the Picard maneuver, or they haven't used it yet. I thought maybe he was going to suggest it. No,
Oh man, the Picard maneuver would be perfect for the dimensional jump thing, right?
yeah, because then they could like put the portal in front of the wrong ship or something.
Exactly.
Or maybe they'll use it, and then we'll be like, "See, that's why we named this show this because we knew it was going to happen. We predicted the future, just like The Simpsons."
Which makes
All right,
if
yeah.
you make enough predictions, some of them are going to be right.
No, for sure. That's the best. So we just have to make like thousands of episodes of the Picard maneuver, and then like eventually someone will point to something I said and be like, "Oh my goodness, that guy predicted that all dentists will have to wear leather jackets in the future."
Makes sense.
I had to try one. Okay, we're getting a little weird. So I think yeah, overall good episode. I'm much happier with season 3 so far. Excited to see where it
Mm.
goes. I think we've made most of our predictions, or like, guessed at what might be happening.
Yeah,
There's Vatic.
we said
We didn't
enough we
see
want to
Vatic
say
much.
about Vatic.
I think so. I mean, like she wasn't in the episode much. It wasn't
No,
about her this time. It was more
and
about them
she's
trying to.
not actually a changeling. That's pretty clear.
I don't think
She's the ally. She's the like-minded soul who's also an enemy of the Federation. She's not one of them.
she's got some scars, which that a makeup artist working on a show puts scars on a person. Well, you see, now I'm overthinking it. I was going to say they only put scars on a person if there is something scripted that, like, in her past, she was tortured or,
Or had some
which,
disease.
yeah, you know what I mean? Like, so maybe that does add to, like, why could it have been something Picard was involved in that got her tortured and, um, or is her face put together from different people's faces? I don't know. Like, I feel like the makeup team had a reason for putting those scars on, but then I might be overthinking it because they might have just been like,
No, there's. I
let's
think
make her
you're
look
right.
really clean. I gotta say one thing. Do you remember the show the movie Little Nicky with Adam Sandler?
Vaguely, I'm pretty sure
Didn't he
I
have
saw
like
it.
didn't he have the exact same hairstyle? with
Yeah.
that, like, you notice how there's like that one hair
Yeah,
in the
that
front?
one thing. No, I think you're right. And it was like like it was like gelled and loose and didn't go with the rest of his hair.
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah, maybe. What was it? I don't remember because there was a devil character too in that, right?
There
He
was,
was like
yeah.
the son of the
I
devil,
can
and it was
see
like,
it, but
oh,
oh,
he's sort of in and out
he's
of the bridge.
he's disappearing. He's disappearing. Come on, little Nicky. Oh wow, I can't show it at all now. Like it won't show it.
Yeah, as Alpha
It
Zero.
won't even show me. I'm gone
So
now.
shocking.
I'm a changeling.
No, but you're right. It's the same hair.
Yeah, so that's pretty cool. Must be the same hairstylist that did Little Nicky. Oh, maybe that's the plot uh, twist.
She's
This is
the
actually a
demon
sequel to
son.
Little Nicky.
It's Adam Sandler shows up. He's like the secret last like cameo as Adam Sandler.
Anyway, we should stop this stream before we
Yeah.
ruin everything. So yeah, no, that's Vatic, and you don't think that the bad guys behind her are changelings? I was like thinking maybe they could be, but you're thinking it wouldn't make sense for them to have masks on or for them to like be cronies in this situation because they consider themselves too important and
Yeah, they
all this.
wouldn't be the henchmen of an ally, and they
But
wouldn't
then it
press
does.
buttons.
Final thought. It does bring into question: are there masks for a reason? Are we going to be revealed that they are like Romulans or they are, like Klingons or something weird?
I think
Or
I
is this
said
just a
last
new way of
episode, you don't wear a mask unless there's going to be a reveal, right?
Yeah. Okay. Good. Well, thanks for watching. Are we ready to
Yeah,
close
let's
it
do it.
down?
Let me pour a little bit more tea. It's maple tea
Yeah.
I'm drinking right now.
Now my tea's invisible. It's like it's interesting when you put something in front of the camera, it thinks it needs to increase um its level of what is that called? Keying. It's keying it out, and it thinks it needs to like key it out now.
Because it
Anyway, I
sees
saved a
what.
little.
Yeah, I don't
What?
understand.
I
I was going
saved
to
a
say
little.
something that didn't make sense.
Okay, so I saved tea so we could do this. All right, so thanks for watching. I hope you're enjoying. Like, subscribe, share, like, and subscribe. And as always, I hope we kept you
Engage.
engaged. Mmm, that's some cold tea. Whew.
That was fun. Later.
I had a candle going the whole time. Oh, okay.
Nice. Good lighting. Natural lighting. There's a word for that, isn't there?
Ah,
Outro.
there's a word. There's a word for everything.